Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. There are many people who think or even dream of having their own island somewhere. Most of these dreams seem to focus on the warm waters of the Caribbean or the South Pacific. Gananoque is a small town on the St. Lawrence River in Ontario, Canada. It is located in the so-called Thousand Islands area. Many people, both Canadians and Americans, live on these habitable islands in the region. It's not that some of these islands can't be compared to the islands in the Caribbean or the South Pacific, because some of them have real castles. Dollar for dollar, a thousand islands can compete with any other islands in the world. They're just on the St. Lawrence River, not in the tropics. The most popular story about the Thousand Islands is related to the salad dressing of the same name. It looks like the seasoning was invented by a local housewife. It was later presented to the owner of a famous New York hotel, who included it in the hotel menu around 1890. However, there is no written evidence of the veracity of this story. I used to drive a truck for a living. We carried out deliveries to 48 neighboring states and Canada. I worked as a driver for a medium-sized company with about 100 trucks. All drivers had a choice: long-haul, regional, or local transportation. Whenever any of us went on a long trip for a week or longer, we had a choice: stay in place for a week to spend time with our families, or return by taking long trips. We could also take our wives with us on the road from time to time. Most transportation companies, which cover the entire country in Canada, leave their drivers on the road for several weeks. There are several professions that are difficult for families. The military is probably the worst, followed by trucking and law enforcement. I worked at a construction site in the summer while in high school, so it was a logical step when I started working full-time after graduation. By the time I turned 23, I was a pretty decent carpenter. When I was 19, I met an office clerk at a commercial bakery. Her name was Julie Simpson. My name is Scott. Scott man. Julie and I got married when we were 21 years old. We were both happy until the banking system and, consequently, the construction industry suffered serious losses. Julie and I talked and decided that I should try driving a truck. They earned decent money, and the biggest disadvantage was the time they had to spend away from home. The company where I worked as a driver announced that they would pay for my truck driving school tuition if I worked for them for a year after getting my license. Julie and I discussed it and decided that we would go for it. They accepted me and I went to school. 3 weeks later, I had a CDL class. The next week, I was put in a truck with a driving instructor. He was an experienced driver who took guys like me on the road to really teach us how to drive. It's one thing to drive a truck pulling an empty trailer, but it's quite another when you attach this truck to a loaded trailer and weigh from 16 to 36 tons. I was supposed to spend 5 weeks with my instructor, but he convinced the security department that I was good enough to have my own truck in 4 weeks. I drove around the city for a week, then drove on local roads for a week. Everything worked fine. I arranged for Julie to come into the office on Friday and collect my salary. It worked pretty well too. We could have received our checks directly, but Julie liked to receive them herself. I worked for the company for about 9 months and was just finishing a week of local driving. My dispatcher Shirley called me and offered me a pretty good deal. We had cargo bound for Vancouver, Canada, and a return flight to Montreal. Only it wasn't really in Montreal. It was in Gananoque. The owner of the company recently bought one of the Thousand Islands. He was incredibly young for a shipping company owner. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years older than me. Shirley told me that there were 2 houses on the island, the main house and the guest house. The owner and his wife wanted to furnish the main house with handmade furniture from Vancouver Island. The guest house was furnished. My job, if that was what I wanted, was to take the cargo to Vancouver and then move the boss's furniture back. It was expected that it would be ready only in a month, but it would be ready by my arrival. So the company's operations department decided to surprise the boss and deliver it early. Now the deal is like this. You can't tell anyone, even to his wife. I'm not saying she'll say anything, but she comes for your salary and may say something to the wrong person. The boss and his wife will be there next weekend. It should be around the time you get there. You'll get to Vancouver and they'll load you up so you can come back. Does this sound like something you might be interested in? Before I could answer, she intervened. Remember, whether you accept it or not, you can't tell anyone anything. Promise? I will accept it and promise not to tell anyone. Good. Now, since you took it, and because I like you, have you seen this brand new Peterbilt standing in the yard? Of course I saw it. Well, it's yours. Put your things in it. The cargo you're carrying is in trailer 2353. You can leave in the morning. Call me when you get to Vancouver and be careful. I went home and told Julie that I had a trip to the West Coast. She didn't mind because the money was good, but we both didn't like that I would be gone for almost 2 weeks. To make amends, we tried our best to use each other to our heart's content. Using Julie has always been something special. She was ready for anything. I've been to Canada in my truck 4 times. Every time the truck was searched, and I mean searched. The only place they didn't search was the bag hanging from my seat. When I crossed the border for the first time, there were photos of her in this bag. After that, I left the photos at home when I found out that I was going to Canada. Other times when I was driving, they never grabbed my bag or any other part of my truck, including under the mattress in the sleeping place. I left the photos at home that trip. It was easy to leave. The border crossing was standard. Canadian officials, as always, were courteous, but absolutely thorough in the search. I called Shirley. She told me that the boss's furniture is ready to ship. They brought her from the island earlier in the day, preparing for my arrival. When I got to my client, it only took him an hour to unload me, and another hour to get to the place where they were going to load me. It took significantly more than an hour to load the trailer, because they loaded each part individually, then packed and secured it. My truck was fully loaded as I headed back east. I returned to the States and headed east on Interstate 90. I returned from Canada to Detroit. The trip from Detroit to Montreal took about 9 hours. I drove to Kingston, parked for the night, and called Shirley. She told me that the boss was on the island and she had a barge ready. I was supposed to go to the commercial loading dock as soon as I could get there in the morning, and they would unload the trailer and take the furniture to the island. I was there at 6, and loading on the barge took almost 10. It took about 45 minutes to get to the island. It was a straight path, but the barge was moving slowly. I went to the guest house to surprise the boss. The island was covered with trees. I knew the way to the apartment complex only by the path. There was a small courtyard adjacent to what I assumed was a guest house. The main house was not too far from the guest house. He looked huge. I saw the boss in the courtyard of the guest house. I walked over, and he was rubbing something into the naked chest of a woman who was lying on a chaise longue. I assumed it was the sunscreen he was applying, and I also assumed the woman was his wife. As I got closer, I could see that it could have been sunscreen, but it wasn't his wife. It was mine. I walked over to them and cleared my throat. They both jumped up and turned to me. It took them a second or two to realize that they had been caught. He didn't recognize me because he hadn't met me before, but she did. I looked at him. I brought your new furniture from the dock. Then he turned to my wife. You might consider putting on some clothes before I come here. I turned around and headed back to the dock. I haven't heard a single word from any of them. I walked past the men lifting the first piece of furniture. I got to the dock before I remembered that I was on a fucking island. I looked around and saw 4 moored boats. We had heard that there were several boats on the island, so I assumed that they all belonged to him. I've never driven a boat, but that had to change. I've watched enough TV shows and movies to know that boats have a throttle. Push, and you'll go ahead. Pull, and the boat will reverse. I also knew that boats don't have a brake pedal, but I'll find out later. I looked into the smallest boat, but there was no key in the ignition. There was a board on the wall with what looked like boat keys with rubber balls attached so they wouldn't drown if they fell into the water. I grabbed all the keys and jumped into the boat. The key that came up was the second one I tried. I threw the rest into the river, with or without rubber balls. The engine started immediately, but the boat was still tied up. I jumped out, untied the front and back, jumped back into the boat, and hit the gas again. The boat turned around in reverse and moved away from the pier quite quickly. As soon as I pulled away from the dock, I pressed the gas forward, and I was thrown back into the seat. The trip back to the city took only about 15 minutes. I approached the city pier too quickly and, hitting the pier, damaged the boat. The engine was still running when I jumped out. A lot of attention was paid to the boat when I got into the truck, packed my things, got out and headed into the city. I looked back and saw that the boat was idling down the river, and there was no one in it. A taxi took me to the city of Kingston and its airport pretty quickly. The first plane took off in less than an hour and was heading to New York. I bought a ticket. My phone rang and I looked to see that it was Julie. She left one message. Please call me back. I called Shirley. Good morning, Scott. Did you succeed? How long, Shirley? How long has what been? How long has he been using my wife? What are you talking about? Oh my God, is she there? She's fine. How long? About 3 months. I'm sorry, Scott. His wife must have been there. Otherwise, I would never have sent you. So you would have sent me somewhere knowing that the boss was using my wife. Who else knows? Shirley? There are only 2 of us. Joey and me. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you very much. Wait, where are you? What are you going to do? Wait, he's on the other line. I'll be right back. Fuck you. Now I understand why she didn't want me to tell Julie about the trip. She would have told Bradley, and there would have been no surprise, especially the one he just had. It was a small airport, and I could see everything and everyone who was coming in and out. I kept looking for her or him to show up, but they didn't. The flight did not take much time at all. We've landed. I rented a car and drove home for 4 hours. She wasn't there. I couldn't stop thinking about what I was going to do all the way home. My phone rang again, and she left another message. Scott, if you're home, I'm on my way. Please don't do anything until I get there and we can talk. We've never had love, Scott. We just played a little bit. Please believe me. Are you saying they've never had love? Jesus Christ. She honestly couldn't think that I was stupid enough to believe that. Could she? In our apartment, I loaded everything I wanted into my pickup truck, went to the terminal, and calmly got to work. Shirley and Joey were there. After they saw that it was me, none of them looked at me. How much money do you owe me, Shirley? Scott, write me a check for everything the company owes me. Now, I'm sorry, Scott. Mr. Bradley said not to give you anything until he talks to you. Shirley, you owe me. Thank you very much. He said you wrecked one of his boats. What else did he say? Did he brag about using my wife behind my back? Did the 4 of you have a good laugh at my expense? Julie came here and told you to keep me off the road as long as possible so she could use Bradley? Write me a check, Shirley, and I won't destroy this whole fucking office. It only took her a couple of minutes to figure out how much I was owed. She called the accounting department and told them to write me a check. I went out and went to the accounting department. They had everything ready for me. I looked at it. I've changed my mind. Transfer it to my card, please. But Scott, deposit directly. Now, please. I gave them my card number and they did it. Bradley would not have been able to stop the direct deposit payment. Then I went to Bradley's house. We had a picnic there once. My wife probably wasn't there just for picnics. Mrs. Bradley opened the door. She looked and acted like she was in a bad way. What can I do for you? What is it? She asked. My name is Scott Mann, and I used to drive your husband's truck. Have a nice day. Wait a minute, mister. What did you say your name was? Mann. Scott Mann. What is your wife's name? Julie Mann. Did you see this morning? With my own eyes. Are you sure? Jesus, lady. Of course, I'm sure. Do you really think that I would make up something like that about my own wife? I walked over to my truck and drove away without having the slightest idea where I was going. So I headed to my parents. It didn't take me long to bring them up to speed. Mom always had coffee ready, and she offered me a cup. I took it. Soon I was stretched out on the couch. I closed my eyes. The next thing I remember, I heard my father's voice. Julie, get off my porch or I'll call the police. But I need to talk to Scott. After what you did to him? Dad asked. No way. But he doesn't understand. Oh, I think he understands it all too well. You've been sleeping with his boss for 3 months. What's so difficult about it? But he doesn't know why. Of course he knows. You're a cheater, that's why. Now get off my porch. She started shouting my name. Scott, talk to me, please. Scott, give me a chance to explain. Scott? Scott? It was a long day, and soon I fell asleep again. The next morning I woke up early and went to my truck. I had no idea where I was going, but I had to go somewhere. I opened the door to sit down, and Julie was sleeping across the seat. She sat up when she heard the door open. I started to leave, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me back. Please, Scott, listen to me. I had no choice. Don't bullshit me. You either use someone or you don't. Have you been drugged with illegal substances? It wasn't like that. So you used it voluntarily. It was a statement, not a question. Scott, just give me a chance. I repeat, you used it voluntarily. Okay, I used it, but besides, you lied. We've never had love. We just played a little bit. God, did you really expect me to believe that? Get out of my truck. She didn't budge, so I took her by the hand and pulled her outside. I was furious and left before she could get her ass off the ground. I went to a fast food restaurant in the city for breakfast. I ordered one of their breakfast dishes and went to take a leak while I was waiting. I took the food to the table, sat down and ate. When I was done, I went to the bank and split our money. My phone rang several times and several people left messages. My former employer, Ernest T. Bradley, left too. Call me and let's talk, or I'll sue you for wrecking my boat, and then you'll go to jail for threatening my employees, and don't think that I won't do it. It was his first message. Look, I used your wife. Get over it. It happens every day. She's not the first wife I've used, and she won't be the last. Swallow your pride. Take it back and use it to the point of stupefaction. This is what she likes and what she wants, so give it to her. If you don't do it, maybe I'll keep doing it. Now get your ass back here and drive my truck home, or I'll report you for theft. Besides, you'll have to drive for me for another 3 months to pay for your truck driving school. There was his second message. God, what an asshole. So he was still in Canada. I called his wife to see if I could meet her instead of just rushing to his house like I used to do. She agreed, and I played his messages for her. She was sick before, but after hearing it, she got worse. At first I wasn't sure I believed you, but now I do. I'm going to set his ass on fire. Can I get a copy of this message? We made her a copy. What are you going to do with your wife? What is it? She asked. Divorce, of course. I just don't know how to approach this. It's simple, she said. Find a good lawyer and hire him. It sounded so simple. I left her house and returned to my parents. They also asked me what I was going to do. I told them the same thing I told Mrs. Bradley. My father, in turn, told me exactly what she had told me word for word. They convinced me, so I started looking for a lawyer. Again, I had no idea where to start, so I started with the letters A in the phone book. I got to D before I found my lawyer, David Dennison, and I hit it off right away. His entire family, including himself, were truckers until he overturned his car and was paralyzed from the waist down. He graduated from law school in a wheelchair. He was the only member of his family who did not work in the trucking industry, but they all knew and respected Ernest T. Bradley. Dennison noted Bradley's youth and business acumen several times. In fact, everyone who knew him respected him. He was well known in society. He sponsored sports teams as well as art programs and donated to all the charities that came his way. Dennison flat refused to believe me when I first told him about what I had discovered in Canada. He was on Bradley's side, and I was almost ready to leave and find another lawyer, but I decided to listen to the messages for him. He finally began to believe. Wow, it will shake up the community if it becomes known. How do you want to handle this? As confidential as possible, or do you want to make a big splash? All I want is to get divorced as cheaply as I can. As far as I understand, it will never get into the newspapers, but the reason for the divorce will be adultery. If that means it's going to spread all over the city, so be it. But there won't be any mental cruelty or shit about irreconcilable differences. She has changed, and it will be fixed. It can be difficult if this message is all you have. Nowadays, courts almost require visual evidence, especially when accusing a person of his position. Well, let's try it. Good. We will deliver the documents to her in the next few days. Do you have any idea where she might be? Either at work at the bakery, or at home, or in Canada with him, I suppose. Well, of course, we can't apply to her in Canada, so we'll try at home or at work. It suits me. You can contact me on my cell phone or at my parents' place. I was tired of living with my parents, so I spent the next few days looking for my own apartment. I found an apartment that wasn't the poshest or the best in town, but it was mine. A week later, Julia was served at work. My father owned a small welding shop. I've never shown any interest or inclination in welding, but that's starting to change. He convinced me to go to work for him, just to get me out of my apartment. Both he and my mother thought I was spending too much time locked up. I was thinking about going to work for another transportation company, but I wasn't too enthusiastic about it. So I went to the welding shop. My dad had a pickup truck with portable welding equipment, and basically all he did was repair things. Sometimes a client would ask for something branded, and my father would cook it. Julie tried to talk to me several times, but after she was served, everything went through our lawyers. Our first meeting took place about a month after she was served. Her lawyer, of course, tried to get the charges of adultery dropped. I categorically refused. Bradley was named in the divorce petition, and Julie desperately didn't want his name to appear anywhere near the divorce suit for adultery. It can ruin his reputation in society. He doesn't deserve it, she said. I exploded. Are you serious? He's a wife-stealing slug, and he should be talked about to the public. Julie intervened. If you treated your wife better, they wouldn't have been able to steal her. This led to a quarrel between us, which could only be stopped by putting us in separate rooms. After we cooled down and were back in the same room, she tried to get me to delete his name again. I'm not going to do that, so forget about it. Why are you trying so hard to protect him? Are you planning to marry him? Are you still making love to him? For your information, he and I are still dating, so yes, I'm still making love to him. Her lawyer just put his head on the table and groaned, and without lifting it, he spoke. You have just confessed to your husband and 2 bailiffs that you committed adultery. This is probably the worst thing you could have done. I don't care at the moment, she said. Then to me. To answer your other question, yes, I'm going to marry him, as soon as he gets divorced. So you think he loves you? I asked. Of course. I put my phone on the table and scrolled through his message for her. That's not what he meant. He was just pissing you off. I laughed when Mr. Dennison took an envelope out of his briefcase and slid it across the table to Julie. Her lawyer intercepted the envelope, opened it, and took out the contents. He read the attached note, then looked through the photos one by one. He gave the package to Julie. She looked at the photos first, then read the note. Mr. Mann, this can help you with the divorce. The first 5 pictures were taken on the island 3 weeks ago. The woman is his hairdresser's wife. She left her husband to spend the weekend with my husband. The next 6 were taken at our house last week. I was out of town with my parents. He picked up this woman in a bar. I have no idea if she's married, and I don't care. I do not know her name, and I doubt that my husband knows either. She was just another ass, just like your wife. It was signed Cynthia. In all the photos, Bradley and the 2 women were either in different stages of undressing or in different poses. There was no doubt that they were making love. Julie pushed the photos back across the table, got up, and left the room. I never saw her again until we met in court. We shared everything. She received half of our money, her jewelry, china, silverware, and her clothes. She stayed in our apartment. In society, Bradley fell out of favor very quickly. His reputation was ruined, and the 3 sports teams he sponsored ceased operations. Cynthia got half of all the assets they had, which meant she owned half of the shipping company and their house. He only got an island in Canada because she didn't want it. He sent my lawyer a bill for truck driving school, accusing me of quitting my job before fulfilling the terms of our contract. Cynthia called to tell me to ignore the letter and asked if I would like to return to work as an operations manager at a transportation company. I succumbed to temptation, but refused her. Over the next year or so, I discovered that if I put my best effort into it, I could make a pretty beautiful metal bead thanks to my father's patience and his teaching abilities. I also realized that I liked doing this. Bradley's trucking business was sold, and I never saw Cynthia again, but I saw Bradley occasionally. I recognized him, but I'm sure he wouldn't have recognized me. When I worked for him, I was one of hundreds of drivers, and he saw us only occasionally. While learning welding, I found that I enjoyed working with metal. So in addition to repairing things in the workshop and using a truck for on-site repairs, I started making small items such as weather vanes, small custom gate hinges, and mailbox stands. My father and I rarely worked on weekends, but one Sunday afternoon I found myself working on a rather ornate weather vane. I had problems with its proportions, so I stared at it, hoping that a solution would magically appear. I didn't hear the door open or close, but I felt someone's presence, so I looked up. It was Julie. None of us said anything. She stood for a couple of minutes before pulling up a metal stool and sitting down. Can we talk? "What is it?" she asked. "I have nothing to tell you." "Good. Just listen." She leaned forward. "I don't have a good reason to do what I did. You and I, had a good life. We had enough money, a nice apartment, and we loved each other. At least, that's what I think. So why, out of the blue, did I decide to sleep with Bradley? The answer is both simple and complex. I could try to blame you and say that you were away too often, because that's one of the lines he fed me, and after a while I believed it. He also said that you mistreated me when you were at home, and after a while I believed it too. He said that almost every truck driver found someone to sleep with while they were on the road, and after a while I imagined you making love to some waitress in a trucker's parking lot or a female truck driver. He also said that truck drivers never earned enough money to treat their women properly, and after a while I became convinced of this. He was, and probably still is, a sycophantic son of a bitch, and I was so trusting. It didn't happen overnight. He's been working on me for months. Then Shirley started working on me, telling me how well Bradley could treat me if I let him. She told me she can control your trips, so I never have to worry about you finding out. She also told me that Mrs. Bradley told her that she did not need love as often as her husband, so she allowed him to sleep with selected women because it made him a better husband for her. She told me that Mrs. Bradley should have approved of the women he slept with, and that she only approved of me because she saw me when I came to pick up your checks. That lie sounds silly now, but it wasn't like that back then. I know that now. I sat and listened. When I thought she had calmed down, I spoke up. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "I don't know. I don't think I ever wanted to tell you that. Not the truth, anyway. I didn't want you to know how stupid I was. I always thought I'd come up with a story that would blame you for everything, and I came up with a few jokes, but I could never tell you about any of them. This afternoon, driving past your store, I saw you here and stopped. I had no idea what I was going to say. Just that I was going to say something if you'd let me, but what I said turned out to be true. What did you expect to get out of it? Just so you know that none of this was your fault, that it was all my own selfish desires and fictional situations that he created for me. I also wanted you to know that, believe it or not, I never stopped loving you. That's where I think you're lying. I don't think you can really love someone and lie to them or cheat on them. You've done both. You even wanted to marry him, if I remember correctly. Are you still making love to him? I can't explain it any better than I've already explained it, and I can't make you believe me, so I won't even try, and no, I'm not dating him. I haven't seen you since that day at the lawyer's office when I saw those photos. She sat for a few more minutes, watching me work. I guess I'd better go. She stood up. Scott? I looked at her. Is there any way to forgive me enough to give me another chance? I shook my head. When I saw him fondling you, it was over. You know where the exit is. After she left, I didn't achieve much, except to reiterate my opinion that my former boss was a first-class asshole, and my ex-wife was dumber than a box of rocks. I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't gone to that island to surprise my boss. Would I still drive a truck and get sloppy seconds? I decided that it was more pleasant for me to make weather vanes and go broke. One day, we received a promotional flyer for the Renaissance Festival in the mail. I've never heard of the Renaissance Festival. There were photos of people participating in jousting tournaments and knights walking around in armor. There were photos of sellers of armor, swords, knives, costumes, and everything that you associate with the Renaissance. It was supposed to be right down the highway in Maryland. And from this leaflet I learned that there are two sports in Maryland, jousting and lacrosse. I didn't believe that jousting was an official sport in any state, so I searched for information and found that it was true. I decided to go. I spent the whole day there and spent most of the time looking at the sellers' goods and watching the visitors. There was a lot of money on the festival grounds, and I realized that I could get my share. Several sword and knife makers, as well as gunsmiths, worked at the site. I liked the armor and shields. I returned home, did a lot of research, and designed my first shield and sword. I also looked up the schedule of Renaissance festivals on the internet. I made 5 shields and 7 swords. I took them to the next nearest festival I could find. I found out that there were a lot of them, and they were all over the country. I arrived there a day earlier to talk to some sellers. I met a salesman who sold what I thought were the highest quality swords and knives there. I offered him a deal. I would keep what I had to see if it would sell, and he would get a commission. He hesitated, but agreed. I was going to spend the night. but there were no rooms available near the festival. It's a sign of how popular they were. So I went home. I rarely trusted strangers, but I didn't have the opportunity to sell them myself. The seller, Teddy Wyckoff, called me on Sunday morning and told me that all my things had been sold. He sent me a check. I had a new business. In the following weeks, I did even more festival stuff. Teddy wanted tin swords and tin shields for the next festival, which was to take place next week. I managed to prepare 4 pieces of each. Meanwhile, I was still helping my father with his business. They called us and asked us to repair the gate on the driveway. It looks like the daughter's boyfriend drove through the gate instead of waiting for it to open. Alcohol was involved, I was told. I went out and saw a huge gate in the circular driveway. The house outside the gate was huge. I met the owner, Mr. James Jameson. At first, I started to turn down the job because I thought it was too big for us. This gate was almost 3.5 meters high. I decided to give it a try. All it would cost us would be a little time and metal if I messed it up. I spent a good part of the day trying to figure out what tools I would need, then went back to the store to see what we had that I could use. I found a couple of places that I thought might work, so I came back the next day. I worked for about 2 hours and really made some progress when a woman about my age brought me iced tea. Her name was Hannah, and she lived there. It was her date who caused the damage. I had my own snacks, but she came out twice with iced tea and stayed to talk each time. It took 2 days to bend, twist, straighten, and weld, but I fixed the gate. Hannah was there on the second day with drinks and a sense of humor. I enjoyed her company. Around the same time, I became interested in armor. They seemed to be popular at festivals, and I was curious how to make them. How long will it take? How much will it cost to make them? And, finally, will we be able to make a profit from them? I was dating a woman I met in the library when I was doing research. We met at least twice a week and made love every time we were together. However, this relationship, like the others I had, ended after a few weeks. There was a movie theater in the mall. I rarely went to the movies, but one Friday night I was so bored that I went. Before the lights went out, Hannah came in with a guy. They sat down right in front of me, and his arm immediately wrapped around her. Less than 5 minutes after the lights went out and the announcements of upcoming films began, I heard Hannah, "If you touch me there again, I'll hurt you." His hand came down on her shoulder. She left in a huff, and her date begged her to come back. I followed them. To give her her due, she didn't take a damn thing from him. I wasn't close enough to hear, but they were arguing about something. I decided to step in, which I had never done before. "I'm sorry, Hannah. Are you okay?" She looked at me. It took her a couple of seconds to recognize me. "No, it's not like that. This asshole has more hands than an octopus, and I'm tired of fighting him off. Could you take me home?" Of course. We were heading towards my truck when another guy came up to us. "Are you okay, Hannah?" He asked. "Right now, yes." "Do you want me to take you home?" He asked. She didn't even look at me before saying yes. They went to his car without even saying goodbye to me, as if I wasn't there at all. I stood and watched them leave. I shook my head and went home. I was at her house a few days later. There were some railings along the path between the house and the pool that required some attention, so Mr. Jameson asked me to come back. Hannah saw me and came over to say hello, but she never mentioned the incident at the cinema. I was a little annoyed that I was completely ignored at the cinema, and I wasn't in the mood to chat. She took the hint and left. I returned the next day with spare parts. These were simple, ready-made railings, so spare parts were readily available. She was on her way to the pool and stopped to chat. I mostly ignored her. I enjoyed our conversations when I was working on the gate, but after the incident at the theater, not very. "Are you mad at me?" "What is it?" she asked. "Do you remember what happened at the cinema last week?" I asked. "You mean when I was with the octopus?" "Yes. What about this?" "You asked me to take you home. Do you remember that?" "Of course." "What happened after that?" "Nothing. Jimmy showed up and took me home." "And you didn't see anything wrong with that?" "No." "Was it bad?" "Not if you didn't see anything, I suppose." I took a hammer and started hitting the metal, just to make a noise, believing that she would leave. "It doesn't make sense." "I think so." She was losing her patience. "I don't understand you." I looked her straight in the eye. "That's the problem." I started hitting the metal again. She took the hint and left. It took the rest of the day to finish the railing. My interest in armor has increased, and I have done a lot of research on how they are made. I made my first armor and was very proud of it. I sent his picture to Teddy to find out what he thinks. Stick to shields and swords, he said, laughing. You're good at it. The armor needs a lot of work before anyone buys it. Just a few days later, I was at a local bar drinking beer and watching a baseball game when Hannah sat down next to me. I'm meeting friends for a drink. Would you like to join us? What is it? She asked. No, thanks. I feel good where I am. She got up and started to leave, but hesitated. She looked at me. Will you ever tell me what I did to make you angry? If I have to explain to you, then I feel sorry for you. Enjoy your drinks. I had almost finished my beer and was about to leave when she returned. My God, Scott, I didn't want to ignore you at the theater. This octopus made me so angry that I didn't understand what I was doing. Please accept my apologies. I assumed that she said something at her table about our conversation, and someone corrected her. Apologies accepted. She smiled. Will you join us now? She paused. Please? Let's just have a drink. I owe you at least that. I smiled back. Necessarily. Thank you. They were all drinking, and the evening turned out to be fun. Two of them, I don't remember their names, reminded Hannah of her manners during the evening. I felt sorry for her. The band broke up and we all left. I went out with Ginny. I sat down next to her at the table and asked her about Hannah. She told me that they had been friends for a long time. Look, Scott, I'm not her best friend, but I'm close. There's something about you that she likes. She's sorry for the way she treated you. She told me that. Damn it. She told the whole table what she told you. You have to give her credit for that. Call her. Do you have her number? No. Give me your phone. I did, and she wrote Hannah's number in it. Call her. One morning the following week, I was working at the store when Hannah came in. I assumed she got the address from her father. Did you have fun last time? I liked it. I like your friends. That's good. But what about me? What about you? Do you like me? I apologized, if you remember. I remember. Then why aren't we friends? What is it? She asked. I smiled. I think we're working on it. An apology does not automatically mean friendship. It just means that you realize that you made a mistake and regret what you did. Whatever you've done, that's why you're apologizing. This person can accept your apology or not. I accepted it, but that doesn't mean we're going to be best friends. It just means that I admit that you understand what you did and regret it. Assuming the apology was sincere. It was sincere. I agree. Good. Then let's go out for dinner. I laughed. Why not? What is it? She asked. It will be a good way to work on developing our friendship. Good. When? Why not tonight? And so it was. Hannah and I had dinner, and our friendship grew stronger. We dated for 2 months before I saw her naked, but that was just the beginning. She was a natural love machine. Our relationship flourished, and it wasn't long before we wanted to spend all our time together. She came to the store just to sit and be with me, and we both enjoyed this time together. I could work, and she could read. We never had to talk or interact. All we needed was just to be close to each other. One night, during a conversation in bed, I found out that she had not been married long. However, she shocked me when she said that John Jameson was not her real father. She and her mother had been married for only 7 years. She had an older brother, and their father died. 2 years later, their mother married Jameson. Their father had a trucking company, and her brother Ernest wanted to take it into his own hands and run it. He was 6 years older than Hannah, and most people thought he was too young, but Hannah and her mother agreed to let him try. He showed real ability, and the company prospered. I got out of bed, poured us both a drink, and went back to bed. Tell me about your brother, I said. I've already told you most of it. Anyway, the important parts. The bottom line is that the transport company was doing well. So good that he and my ex-sister-in-law bought an island in Canada. Then some fool sank her fangs into him, and eventually he divorced and sold the company. Obviously, this fool's husband started driving a car for him and thought they could make some money off my poor brother. His wife squeezed into the frame and seduced him. They arranged it so that the husband would find his wife and my brother together on his island. My sister-in-law divorced my brother, took half of the company, and then they were forced to sell it. What a pair of fucking thieves. I finished my drink in one gulp. How much did they extort from him? I asked. My brother never told me, but they had to get something. Do you know their names? I knew, but I forgot. I decided to tell her what really happened, but I thought that would be the end of our relationship, so I decided to take my last piece off her ass. I put down my glass, took her glass and put it down too. Then I started kissing her and went down to her chest. I knew that when I touched any of them with my mouth, I was going to use it. Her hips started bouncing and she started talking to me. Use me while you're doing this, please. I rolled over on top of her and lifted my hips. Damn it! How can something be so pleasant? She almost screamed. Don't stop. After we calmed down, I almost talked myself out of telling her who I was, because I've never had a better love than the one I just experienced. We were at her house and I was going home anyway, so I got dressed. I was sitting on the edge of her bed, putting on socks and shoes. The time came, and I started. Let's go back to the story of your brother's divorce. Was what you told me the official story or his version? He told me, so that was the official version. Why are you asking? Because that's not how it happened at all? What do you mean? So I told her the real story. About halfway through, she jumped out of bed, still naked, and just stared. In the end, I said that the only thing Julie and I had achieved was a divorce, not extortion. When I finished, all she said was, "You're lying. Get out." I'm not lying. It's true. She threw a pillow at me. You're lying. Get out and don't come back. With that, I walked out. I hated it when it ended like this, but I loved that last love. Life went on. I had another period of lull in society, and it seems that I could not find a way out of the impasse in which I found myself. One evening I wanted to show off, and I had dinner at a very nice restaurant. I finished the main course, put a napkin to my mouth, and looked around. Hannah and her brother were sitting a few tables away from me. There was a small cake with candles on their table. I signaled to the waiter that I was ready to receive the bill. He brought it, and I paid. I got up, went straight to Hannah's table and sat down. They both looked at me like I was an alien. Her brother spoke first. Are you sure you're at the right table? What is it? He asked, obviously not remembering me. Indeed, and I think you should tell your sister the truth about your divorce. She knows about it. Who the hell are you? But obviously she doesn't know the truth, so you need to tell her the true version. Fuck you. Scott, what are you doing? She almost screamed. Get out of here. As if by magic, the waiter appeared. Is there a problem here? He asked. This guy, Hannah said, pointing at me, was sitting here uninvited and threatening my brother. I want him out of here. Of course. Sir, I have to ask you to leave. I looked at Bradley first. You're a real slug. Then I looked at Hannah. I do not know why you never talked to his ex-wife, but check the courthouse and see the record of my divorce. Then you'll know the truth. Just get out of here, she said. I left, thinking it was the last time I'd see her. I worked in my shop on the projects that interested me the most, axes and chainmail. I was too busy to see her anyway. A festival was planned for the following weekend. I took some shields, as well as samples of my axes and chainmail, to show Teddy. He got me a salesman's pass, so I drove through the entrance. When I got there, he was talking to a young lady dressed in an antique suit. I stood and waited while they talked. He looked in my direction, recognized me, and motioned for me to come to him. Diana, this is Scott. Scott, Diana. He spoke to her. Scott is a designer and creator of some of our things, and I understand that he may have some new things. Right, Scott? I laughed. That's what I'm doing. I got some new stuff out of my truck. Both he and Diana froze in front of it as if it were a treasure. I couldn't take my eyes off her bodice. Every time she leaned forward, I leaned in with her, hoping to see more, but it was too crowded for me to see better. I spent a lot of time with them and even had dinner with them. For dinner, there were meat pies and iced tea from another seller. I wanted to ask about their relationship, but it never seemed like the right time to ask that question. There were many other people walking around, renewing friendships and contacts from other festivals. At least half of the people were dressed in vintage costumes. Some men imitated sword fighting for their own amusement. These fights served as rehearsals for the fights in front of the visitors, which began the next day. I don't remember seeing so many people having so much fun. Teddy had a tent in the area reserved for vendors and reenactors, so I stayed with him overnight. When everything calmed down, I asked him about Diana. She and her sister are the organizers of this particular festival, as well as many others around the country. Everyone is happy to see her. We have been friends for many years. In fact, if you weren't here today, she would be. Oh shit, why didn't you say anything? I'd go to a motel. No, you wouldn't go. Even if I let you, there are no rooms available for 50 kilometers around. When the visitors started arriving the next day, it became even more fun for the reenactors to communicate with them, and Diana, as always, was a huge success, as I was told over and over again. I spent the whole weekend with Teddy. Several times I looked after his counter while he and Diana went to his tent. I had a lot of time to talk to other sellers and visitors. We sold everything Teddy had in stock, plus what I brought with me. It was a profitable weekend. I decided to attend more festivals. The festival ended on Sunday. I helped Teddy take down his tent and pack everything. It was an 8-hour drive home, so he convinced me to stay another night. Their next festival was 18 hours away. They could start preparing for the opening on Wednesday. I didn't think I'd have enough time to make a chainmail, but I told him I'd try. When I got home, I immediately went to the workshop and started working. It was late when I started yawning and realized that I was tired. I hardly slept at the weekend. The clock showed that it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning when I left. It was about 3 when I got home. Less than 5 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I opened the door and Hannah literally fell into my arms. She smelled of alcohol. 2 policemen were standing behind her. Are you Scott, man? Yes. Is she your girlfriend? I know her, but she's not my girlfriend. Are you sure? She insists that you're her boyfriend. Not even close. The last time I saw her, she called me a liar and kicked me out of her house, so I promise you that I'm not her boyfriend. Which wasn't exactly true. The last time I saw her was in a restaurant, but it wouldn't have made any difference to them. Good. Come on, Tommy, let's get her. Tommy was obviously his partner, because he stepped forward and took her hand. Where are you taking her? I asked. Spend the night at the station. No, don't do this. I'll take care of her. Are you sure? No. But I can't let her spend the night at the station. I left her dressed and put her on the only bed I had. Mine. I would sleep on the couch, which was better than an air mattress in Teddy's tent, but I would prefer my own bed. Instead, a drunken woman lay snoring in it. I was almost asleep when I heard sounds like someone was throwing up. I jumped up and ran to my bedroom. It was too late to bring the trash can because the vomit was scattered all over the floor. She looked at me, then felt like throwing up again and did it. It only took me about 2 seconds to decide what to do. I left the room and closed the door. I fell asleep on my couch with a smile on my face. I woke up the next morning, opened my bedroom door, and almost passed out from the smell. There was no way I was going to shower, shave, or get dressed in this horrible-smelling room, so I went to work. I hadn't heard from her all day and fully expected her to still be asleep when I got home. I was wrong. She left, and the apartment was spotlessly clean. There was not even a residual smell of vomit. I immediately went to the shower. I looked for a note or something, but there was nothing there. When I went to bed that night, I found that she had even changed the bed linen. I only had one set, so she must have washed them. She probably washed her clothes at the same time. I worked tirelessly, but I couldn't finish any new chain mail. Teddy came in and took some shields, swords, and axes that I had stashed away. We discussed hiring a couple of people to help us, but we both understood that there were few metalworkers. Then we discussed the possibility of practicing a little bit, and that's what we decided to do. We have placed ads in a regular newspaper and in the newsletter of the festival. It was Friday evening, and I was in the workshop working on inventing a machine that would make chain mail faster than I could do it. There were a couple available on the market, but I thought I could do it better. It was late and I was tired when there was a knock. It was a very sober Hannah. Thanks for saving me from the police. I stood there and nodded. I was trying to clean up after myself. Was everything all right? I nodded again. She couldn't think of anything to say as we both just stood there and looked at each other. Look, it's been a long day, and I need to get some sleep. I pushed past her to the door, closed it, locked it, and headed for my car. Good night. I was almost in the car when I heard. You were right. My brother lied. I'm sorry. I just waved over my shoulder, got in my car, and drove home. The armor fascinated me. After Teddy criticized the first armor I made, I did a lot of research and made another armor that I used as a model for others. They were time-consuming and very difficult, but I loved the challenge. I felt ready to make my debut with him. I took him to the next festival, and Teddy liked him. We could have sold it a few times, but we wanted to use it as a sample of my work. People looked at it, commented on it, and if they wanted to buy something for themselves, we talked about any changes they would like to make to their order. My festival life has been good and profitable. I bought a trailer and transported my tools and supplies to move from festival to festival. I've been working on my products. Sometimes I worked at the booth in front of the visitors, sometimes in the area of a private supplier. One evening, during a break between festivals, I was talking to my father and expressed surprise at how Renaissance metal products could have such success. Who knew that so many people were interested in armor and could afford it? These things didn't come cheap. The festival season ended and I started dating a girl I met at our local car dealership. I was thinking about buying a new truck. My dad's welding truck was old, so I thought we'd install welding equipment on my truck, sell it old, and I might buy a newer, larger one. She was servicing her car, and I was admiring the new truck parked at the showroom. We struck up a conversation and eventually exchanged phone numbers. A week later, we had our first date, then the second one, etc. One evening I drove her home, and she invited me in. We had a second drink, and I was sitting on her couch. She stood in front of me and started unbuttoning her blouse. "Do you mind if I make myself comfortable?" "What is it?" she asked. "No, if you don't mind if I watch and enjoy it," I replied. She grinned. "That's the whole point of the action. It looks like you have everything planned out." Oh yes. Her blouse was off, and her skirt was about to fall to the floor. I reached for the waistband of her panties, but she pushed my hands away. "Let me do it. You just watch and enjoy. You like watching a lady undress, don't you?" "I don't know. I've never watched it before." She laughed a deep, throaty laugh. "I hope you make love better than you lie. And I hope it takes you the same amount of time to get undressed." I said, "Oh, you won't be disappointed." I got up. "You're pretty confident, aren't you?" "Oh, yes," she said. "Now it's your turn." I started unbuttoning my shirt. "Slow down, Tiger. We have the whole night ahead of us. Let me enjoy watching it." I slowed down and she licked her lips. I kicked off my shoes and unbuckled my belt. Then he unzipped his trousers. When I started to pull my pants off my legs, she put her palms on my palms and knelt down, following my pants to the floor. She stopped when she was on her knees. I looked down and saw that her hands were resting on her hips. She looked up at me. "What's next? T-shirt or shorts?" "What is it?" she asked. "What do you prefer?" "A t-shirt. Save the best for last." I took off my t-shirt and threw it on the floor. She picked it up and held it to her nose. "God, I love the smell of men," she said, "but I like this one better." She said, "Look at me." I told her, "Look into the man's eyes." "I like it," she said. "Is it better than making love?" I asked. She stood holding my hands. "There is nothing better than making love. Do you want to demonstrate?" "I thought you'd never ask." She led me into the bedroom. I left for my house around 3 in the morning. All the way home, I compared her to Hannah and the last time we made love, and I couldn't decide who was better. This relationship lasted a good 4 months before we broke up. My phone reminded me that I had been ignoring it all evening, and there were messages for me. 3 from Hannah. "Scott, please call me when you get this message. I don't care what time it is. You are welcome." I took her word for it. She answered after 2 rings. "Hi, Scott," she said, sounding a little tipsy. "Did I wake you up?" "I think I dozed off. I was trying to stay awake, waiting for your call." "Good." I called. "What's so important?" "I wanted you to know that my brother lied about his divorce." "You were right, and I'm sorry." "You've already apologized for that. Is there anything else?" "Yes." There was a pause. "Can we see each other again? I miss you." "Honestly, there's no way you and I can date. Knowing who your brother is and that he was having an affair with my wife? If we were serious about each other, we would inevitably run into him, and I would always feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to put myself through that kind of ordeal." I could tell she was crying. "I knew you were going to say that, but I was hoping you wouldn't say it. Goodbye, Scott." The Renaissance festivals were in full swing again. I arranged my passes, bought a tent and some camping gear, and hit the road. Most of the time, I was helping Teddy at his booth. When I wasn't doing this, I was working on creating new things to sell. My armor improved a lot during the off-season, and we sold at least one armor at every festival. We could have sold more, but it took a hell of a long time to make each one. 2 days after we closed one of the festivals, Teddy called and asked if I could work at his booth for the next one. I told him yes. He was not far from the festival venue, so he brought his trailer with everything I would need. I fully loaded my truck and left my trailer at home. I took his trailer. I have worked at 3 festivals in a row and even made several billboards in front of the visitors. I was also able to work with my chainmail machine, and by the 3rd festival I had demonstrated this as well. The next festival I was going to attend was supposed to take place near Philadelphia and last 11 days. It was one of the largest in the country. They usually lasted from Thursday to Sunday, but this one started on Thursday, continued over the weekend, the following week, and the following weekend. I spent 2 weeks at home working on the material for it, and mostly on the armor. My father became an expert in shields, axes, and swords. I worked late every night. One night, late at night, my doorbell rang. I opened it, and a very drunk Hannah fell into my arms. "Is this your girlfriend?" One of the 2 policemen who were with her asked. "If it keeps her off camera tonight, I think so." I half carried, half dragged her to my bedroom and just threw her on the bed. I showered, shaved, put on my pajamas and took my clothes the next day, in case she repeated her behavior and threw up everything. The next morning, I looked in on Hannah, who was still sleeping. I was trying to decide whether to stay and try to talk to her or just forget about it. I went to work. That evening, when I returned home, the house was perfect again. She even cleaned my kitchen. In the bathroom, my toothbrush and toothpaste weren't where they usually were, so I put them where they should have been. The toothbrush was wet, as was the dishcloth on the sink. I took the enchilada out of the freezer and put it in the microwave. I had dinner, but I never tasted it. The next morning I left for the Philadelphia Festival. I took with me all the material I had for shields and chainmail. I was planning to do a lot of demonstrations. The first day was amazing, and from that moment on, everything got even better. On the first Sunday, a crowd of spectators watched me almost all day. Teddy and I were both exhausted when the festival closed for the day. Evenings in the cellars area have always been the center of parties. Food was cooked, music was played, alcohol was consumed, sword fights were rehearsed, armor was repaired or tried on, horses were tended and women were used, and there were men in a couple of tents. It was not unusual to walk past a tent and hear the sounds of love, or walk past a camper or a van on wheels and watch it sway. I was sitting outside my tent after everything had settled down, and I was thinking how great it would be if there was someone in my tent with whom I could cuddle up to each other. Hannah was probably free, but I just couldn't bring myself to call her. The crowds on Monday were hardly crowds, but the foot traffic was steady. No attendance records were broken that day. It was the middle of the day, and I was demonstrating how exhausting it is to assemble a chain mail. I looked up and saw Hannah watching me. I continued my demonstration and asked those who were watching me to ask questions. They weren't there, and people just dispersed. Hannah was standing there. "Do you like doing this?" "What is it?" she asked. "Yes, I like it," I replied. "You're doing well." She walked away and disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her until the end of the show. My parents arrived on Wednesday and brought more shields and axes. I showed them around, and they didn't seem to be happy with what I was doing. I showed them where the vendors were staying, and especially my mother, who hated setting up my tent. The rest of the week and the weekend went very well. Both Teddy and I were happy. When I got home, I took the day off. When I went to the store, my father was working on a chainmail for me. I started telling him about my plans for a mobile home and a bigger trailer. The door opened and Hannah came in. "This festival was fun. A few of my friends and I are going to the next one, which takes place not far from here," she said. "We even thought about going in armor." "It should be fun," I replied evasively. "Will you be there?" "Probably." My father and I continued to work and did not look at her. "Can I come with you?" "It's not too practical, because I'll be there from Wednesday to Sunday." "It's all right. We can get a motel room." "I don't think so. They sell everything months in advance." "Where do you sleep?" "In the tent." "It sounds funny." Maybe we could share it? It's a small tint. A little one can be funny. My father looked at me, grinned, and left. Look, she said, you will never let yourself forget that my brother slept with your wife, which means that you and I will never have a long-term relationship. She looked around to see where my father was. But that doesn't mean we can't be love buddies, right? We like to use each other, don't we? I agreed. So why not use each other? How does it sound? I looked at her. You're the best thing I've ever had. I said it once and I'll say it again, but the thought of sharing leaves me cold. I can't stand the thought of making love to you just so that you can go to another man, even if you didn't have love with him. We both need to find a relationship and respect it. She came close to me, reached out, touched my face, and kissed me. You don't understand. I already have a relationship. If you want to date someone, anyone, go ahead. But know that I will always be available for anything you want, anytime you want it. I don't need anyone else. I love you, and I fully intend to respect this relationship. She kissed me again and left. My father must have been watching when she left. What are you going to do with her? I was still looking at the door she had just left through. I have no idea, Dad. What do you suggest? Either get used to the fact that her brother slept with your ex-wife and accept the possibility that she won't go anywhere, or leave town and keep your head down. Maybe now is the time to do what your mother and I talked about. What is it? We'll talk about it when we get home. We were sitting at the dinner table when he told my mother about Hannah. So, I thought maybe it was time to give Scott the gift we were talking about. I think you might be right, she said. What are you two talking about? I don't like the idea of you sleeping in a tent. My mom said, we're going to buy you a mobile home. My father said, I knew that arguing with them wouldn't stop them. Besides, I thought it was a good idea. It took a week to find what I wanted. I didn't need driving lessons for this, as I had a Class A CDL, so I just hugged them both, thanked them, and bought a trailer to pull it behind me. I have installed the trailer so that I can work in it if necessary. I also connected the power from the van to the trailer. It was a great setup. I focused on armor while my father made shields, swords, and axes. We both really enjoyed doing this kind of work. Teddy got jealous when he saw my trailer and wanted to know if I had christened it already. What do you mean? I asked. Love. Has anyone ever made love in it? No. He grinned. Do you mind if Diana and I laughed. Help yourself. He texted her, and she was there 10 minutes later. He grabbed her hand, and they started walking. They were holding hands and laughing when they returned. We want you to be the first to know, he said. Diana and I are going to get married. She hugged me. It was your van that drove him crazy, she said. Thanks. I hardly saw any of them that weekend, but my van smelled of perfume and other things. I was home for a week, and Hannah saw the van and stopped. I had a long period of calm, and I knew I could use her, so I showed her around, and she was suitably impressed. It's a lot more than a tent, she said. Yes, it is, I said. It's a double bed, isn't it? What is it? She asked. Yes, and a large closet. Of course there is. Looks like this shower room can hold 2 people. They probably can. We were in the living room of the van, and she came up to me. Has he been baptized yet? What do you mean? I asked, even knowing what she meant. Love. Has anyone ever made love in it? I lied. No, it's brand new. Well, she almost whispered. We can do it now or this weekend. We were in the yard of my parents' house, so the now she was talking about was impossible. What do you mean by this weekend? I asked. We will have enough time after the closing of the festival in the evening. We can do it then. I'm sorry, but it's in Southern Virginia. Even if I said yes, it's too long a trip for you. You're right, she said. So I'll just go with you. Didn't you hear what I just said? She started tugging at my shirt, pulling me towards her. Scott, you've admitted that I'm the best ass you've ever had, and you're the best I've ever had. Besides, I'm in love with you, and I know you like me more than a little. I think we should just use each other whenever we can. Besides, I have a dress that I think would be perfect for the festival. Everyone will love it. She kissed me, gently and tenderly, as if she was in love with me. Especially you. I'm leaving here Tuesday at 5 in the morning. I won't wait for you, I said meekly. She kissed me again. You won't have to. She was right. She unpacked her clothes, filled the kitchen, and was in bed in the van by midnight Monday. Right after I got behind the wheel on Tuesday morning, she came over and sat in the passenger seat, wearing only a housecoat. I know because she kept flashing her eyes at me every time I looked in her direction. She met Diana, and they both wore low-cut dresses. I couldn't wait for the end of the working day. At the end of the day, Teddy and I closed the booth. Diana and Hannah were cooking dinner in the van when we got there. I've never tasted anything Hannah cooked, but it was delicious. After Teddy and Diana left, Hannah asked me if I wanted to take a shower with her. Before you fuck me. There were 2 people in the shower, and then we got to the bed. She pulled off all the bedclothes except the bottom sheet before crawling onto the bed on all fours. She glanced over her shoulder. Use me like this. Who am I to refuse? She rolled over onto her back, and I moved to her head. She lifted her head and inhaled. Again, who am I to refuse? So I'm back. I had that desire, and when the time came, I let it happen. That night was the first of many nights and days when we used each other in that van. That was also 3 years ago. At first, her family tried to convince her that the only reason I allowed her to travel with me was to get even with her brother, because he convinced them that Julie and I were to blame for his divorce, not him. Obviously, none of them had been in court to see the truth, and they, like Hannah, believed him. Hannah provided them with copies of my divorce application and her ex-sister-in-law's statement. He stayed in the city and was responsible for a couple more divorces before deciding that the other side of the country would be better for his health. He made this decision after a shotgun blast from an angry husband hit his ass. Hannah has some new dresses that she wears at the festival. They don't emphasize her big belly so much. She didn't say she wanted to be a wife before she became a mother, but I know that's on her mind. Me too. End.